All right, hello once again. Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class, I've been creating a series of video presentations that are based on the PowerPoint slides for one of the textbooks for the class, the AWD1000 class, and that is the Murox JavaScript and jQuery 4th edition. I've done videos for the first section and for the third section. So I'm in the second one because I did a little bit off. And I'm in Chapter 10 now, talking about how to work with forms and data validation. So introduction of forms and controls, how to use jQuery to work with forms, and a validation application. All right, so with that said, let's just jump right into it. As always, we begin how to work with forms and validation with our applied objectives and our knowledge objectives. All right, well, here's a simple form. Now, when you think about this, well, what do we have? How many validations can we do on here? I mean, just when you think about it, well, you want to make sure there's something here so that it's not empty. You'd probably also want to make sure that it's a validly formed email. All right, for the first name, well, at a minimum, you'd probably want to make sure that it wasn't empty. So after you trimmed it, that it wasn't empty. And you may or may not want to make sure that it has only letters in it, but you probably wouldn't want that because think about it. If you're going to have somebody for their first name, it's possible they could have a hyphen in there. They could have some kind of a special character like an apostrophe or something else. Okay? So what do we have here? Well, notice we've got an action attribute. So this says that when we click the Join Our List button, it should go to bring up this file. It's a get, so it should be sending. So for example, with what we've got here, Judy@Murox.com and Judy, it should be calling this file, and the query string it should be passing is an email address of Judy@Murox.com and first name of Judy. All right, hopefully that's pretty obvious about what that is. So the attributes for the form element, as they say right here, the name, and notice name again. A name can be referred to by client-side or server-side code. The action, all right, and that's the file typically that you want to have come up, and the method, which is typically either get or post, and if you don't list one, it defaults to get. So what do you have on a form? Well, you've got the form itself, you've got a bunch of controls, a bunch of fields, you typically have a submit button, you typically have a reset button, and you typically want to do some kind of validation. Now, notice these are HTML5 controls here. So these are the newer controls. Email to make sure that that will make sure that the email that you put in is at least validly formed. URL, which should typically says that it must start with an HTTP and HTTPS, etc. Tel for a telephone. That's not widely supported. Number, where you can put in minimums, maximums, steps, etc. and keep something so that it only accepts numbers. Range, so again, where you can put in minimums and maximums. Dates, which will typically bring up a date picker, and time, which, well, I don't remember exactly what that brings up. Okay? All right, so those are your common controls. The basic attributes for working with forms, autofocus is just that. All right, placeholder is typically if you want to put in placeholder text. All right, so they've got a form here that uses some of these controls. And you'll notice that with the email, it's the first field, so you put autofocus, so that was where the cursor will be when it starts. And you've got this tell, and it's got a placeholder in there. It's going to be a very simple form that's right here. So since you put in type email, if you don't validly form your email, you'll notice there's no @ sign here. You'll get that. If you put the @ sign in and nothing after it, it'll tell you basically you need something after it. Now, you can put in something kind of almost silly like a@b.c or a@b.com or something, and it'll take it because all it's looking for is this a validly formed email? That's it. All right, name has nothing special on it. And again, phone has got the placeholder, so you see it in gray right there. And when you click on it, as soon as you start typing, what's in gray goes away. If you put nothing in there and you move out of it, the gray stuff in gray there will come back again. All right. So the attributes for data validation. Okay, the first is required, which hopefully at least is pretty self-evident. All right, that the field is required. All right. Second, title. So I think what that does is it puts like a little tooltip on there. So if you set up a title and then you take your mouse and you put it over the field, you get a little tooltip. Pattern is typically the pattern that you want to set up. So it's some kind of, can be, for example, a regular expression pattern rather. No validate, where you're kind of sending a message to the system for basically leave this alone. And autocomplete I've already mentioned. All right, there are pseudo classes for these, required and valid and invalid. So you take a look right here, and again, they come back to the same form. They've made all three fields required. Notice the autocomplete here is off. And more, I'm watching a lot of videos and stuff online where a lot of people will turn off autocomplete. And if you've never seen autocomplete before, let's see if I can bring something up that shows autocomplete, just so you can see it and you know what we're talking about here. Let's see. So if I take my mouse and I put it, that's autocomplete. See that? Now, some people like it, some people dislike it, and it's usually for the same reason. They like it because it fills stuff in for them automatically, or they don't like it because it fills stuff in for them automatically. All right? And, it really isn't that hard to understand both sides of that. So here's the pattern: 3 digits, a hyphen, 3 digits, a hyphen, and 4 digits. As you may or may not be aware, or you could probably guess otherwise, if you want to set this up so that you can put in either 3 digits, a hyphen, 3 digits, a hyphen, 4 digits, or you want to allow 3 digits in parentheses, space, digit, 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 dash, etc. Now, I've already shown you the HTML5 pattern.com site, and that just shows the same one that you've got here, but it also shows them for other countries. All right, so there you go. So now notice, please match the requested format. In other words, they didn't put an area code in here, what we refer to as an area code. All right, 2 of the reasons why you need JavaScript for data validation. Well, number 1, I'm just going to take what they said, but I'm going to, all right, let's just say what they've got there. The HTML5 controls may not be implemented the same way by all browsers. That's becoming less and less of an issue, I think, today. Number 2 is really the more important. HTML5 is limited in the amount of validation it can do naturally. All right. So here are the jQuery selectors for form controls. I'm not going to go over any of them, but you'll notice that they pretty much do dovetail with all of the controls that we learned about in the HTML section of the class. The only difference being, of course, that these all have a colon before them. All right. The jQuery methods for getting, for setting, and for trimming control values. Remember, trims any leading or trailing space. All right. And you use these, like they say, to either set a value or get a value. So notice in here, we're getting a value. How do I know it's a get? Because we are putting the value on the right-hand side of an equal sign. So it's, we're telling it to parse int to find whatever has got the ID of age, grab its value, and throw it into age. All right. If we're going to do that, now typically trimming isn't a big thing in there, but for example, for first name, we might want to trim. And then this all goes back to something I've mentioned in other lectures, and that is that years and years ago, when people started first having forms out on the internet and they made fields required, when people didn't want to fill them out, they would just hit the space bar once or twice. All right. Now notice this is different. How to get the value of the checked radio button. So you've got to put input and No, notice the name dot checked dot val. All right. How to get an array of the selected options from a list. Notice we have to set it up as an array then. All right. So these methods are pretty similar to ones that we have talked about with forms, not in JavaScript, but just in HTML, and that is focus. All right. Remember, again, if I've got this, let's go back. If I'm in here and I type in Zach at modulemedia.com and I hit tab, then a blur event takes place here and a focus event takes place here. If I put in Zach and I hit tab again, a blur event takes place here and a focus event takes place there, etc. All right. Change, typically that's going to be involved, for example, like if you've got a select where you've got a drop-down list and every time you change from one thing to the other. All right, same with select. These are the handlers for that. Submit is typically with the form then. All right, so as it says, here's a handler that disables or enables radio buttons when a checkbox is either checked or unchecked. All right. Now, what's kind of neat about this isn't this example, but maybe you've seen this before, where they will have, for a person, you might ask for their name, address, city, state, zip, all the goodies. And you might have like a mailing address. And then underneath that, or maybe you have your company address, and it's got name, address, city, state, zip, etc. Then underneath that, it might have mailing address, but it may be exactly the same as your regular street address. So typically up there, what you'll have is something like you might have a checkbox that says, same as above. And if you check it, there's no sense in repeating the stuff. All right. All right. So the methods for triggering events, they're the same ones that you just saw here, but here it was for for forms, and here it's for triggering events. So notice right here with join list, it says it's a regular button, not a submit button. It's not type equals submit. That is. So here's a good example. Here's this validation application. All right. And you can see most of the stuff that's in here. All right. And must be a valid email address, and it's not. Must be 6 or more characters. This field is required. So start thinking about all the validations you have to do. Well, if this is required, there's 1. If this must be a valid email address, that's 2. If this is required, that's 3. If it must be 6 or more characters, that's 4. If this is required, that's 5. If it must match this one, that's 6, etc. And you can start working your way through there like that. All right, so here's how they set that up. And next will be the JavaScript for it. Notice the handler for the change event of the radio buttons. So as you change, it's going to make sure that either in here, all right, so individual, notice how the company name is grayed out. Corporate might gray out the first name and the last name, for example. Okay. You've got the stuff with the email. Notice they've done a trim on there. They're grabbing the value, etc. And that's it. Like I said, I know I'm not giving you very much in these things, but that is Chapter 10. So when I come back, the only one that's left here is Chapter 11. And that's on how to use jQuery plugins and UI widgets. I'll be back with that shortly.